The first night in my son-in-law's house, I watched my wife ask permission to sit. Not out loud. Not directly. It was in the way she hovered near the couch, purse still on her shoulder like she hadn't earned rest yet. In the way she glanced at him before lowering herself onto the edge of the cushion, back straight, hands folded, ready to spring up if needed. 62 years of marriage had taught me her habits. This wasn't one of them. The house was big. Too big for the quiet it carried. Clean lines, expensive furniture, a smell of lemon cleaner and control. He walked through it like a landlord inspecting a property, not a son welcoming parents. My daughter followed him, smiling too much, explaining too quickly. "You'll be comfortable here," she said. "Just make yourselves at home." Home is a word men like me don't use lightly. I sat across from them, hands resting on my knees, listening. My son-in-law laid out rules like suggestions: where shoes go, what time the kitchen closes, how mornings run. He didn't look at me when he spoke. He looked at my wife. As if she were the one who needed instruction. As if I were already furniture. She nodded. Every time. I told myself it was temporary. Health scare. Rising costs. Pride swallowed for peace. Men my age are taught that endurance is a virtue, that silence keeps families intact. I believed that lie longer than I should have. Dinner came late. My wife stood to help without being asked. Plates appeared. Water glasses filled. When she finally sat, he joked, light, almost friendly, about how Mom keeps busy. Laughter followed. Even my daughter laughed. My wife smiled, that careful smile women wear when they don't want to make trouble. Something in my chest went cold. Later that night, I went to the bathroom and passed the guest room. The door was half open. The light inside was on. I heard the sound of water, then scrubbing. I looked in. My wife was on her knees, wiping the floor. A spill from earlier. One no one else noticed, or cared to clean. Her hands moved fast, practiced. Her face held that same careful calm. I didn't say a word. I closed the door quietly. And in that silence, something in me began to sharpen. No one ever asked her to serve, until they started getting irritated when she didn't. The shift was quiet. That's how these things always happen. Not with orders, but with looks. Pauses. Little sighs dropped like breadcrumbs meant to guide behavior. By the third morning, my wife was up before the sun, moving softly through a kitchen that wasn't hers, careful not to wake anyone, careful not to make noise that could be mistaken for inconvenience. I lay in bed listening. Cabinet doors opened and closed with apology in them. The kettle whispered instead of whistled. When she thought everyone was still asleep, she allowed herself to hum, low, almost shy. A song she used to sing when our children were small. I hadn't heard it in years. At breakfast, my son-in-law glanced at the counter. "Oh," he said casually, "you didn't make the flatbread today." Not angry. Just surprised. Like a service had been interrupted. My wife froze for half a second, long enough for me to see it, then smiled. I wasn't sure if. "It's fine," he said, already scrolling on his phone. "Just saying. We usually eat by 8. My daughter didn't look up from her coffee. After that, the list grew without ever being written down. Laundry, help. Dishes that somehow waited for her hands. Groceries that needed picking up because she was already out. Every task came wrapped in politeness. Every expectation disguised as contribution. I watched my wife disappear one favor at a time. She stopped sitting with us in the evenings. Always one more thing to finish. She ate standing up, leaning against the counter like she hadn't earned a chair. When I told her to rest, she shook her head. "It's easier this way," she whispered. Easier for who, she didn't say. One afternoon, I offered to wash the dishes. My son-in-law laughed. No, no. She knows how we like it done. He said she like it was a job title. That night, I asked my wife if she was tired. She hesitated. Then nodded once. Small. Controlled. I don't want to cause problems, she said. We need to keep the peace. For the kids. Peace. Another word that sounds noble until you see who's paying for it. I realized then that this wasn't temporary. It was training. And the longer it went on, the harder it would be to undo. As I turned off the light, I heard my son-in-law's voice from the living room. Amused. Loud enough for her to hear. Mom's really useful, you know. Old school, but useful. I stared into the dark, counting my breaths. Because if he thought usefulness was all my wife was worth. He had no idea what I was about to take from him. He laughed when she dropped the plate, and I saw exactly who he was. It was a Sunday. Family visiting. His parents, a cousin, two people I didn't know but was expected to greet like they mattered. The table was full, conversation loud, the kind of noise that pretends to be warmth. My wife moved between chairs with practiced care, balancing plates like she was carrying something fragile that might break if she breathed wrong. She always did that, held her breath. The plate slipped from her fingers near the edge of the table. Not a full crash. Just a sharp clatter as it tipped, food spilling across the floor. The room went quiet for half a second. Then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a reflex. A real one. Open mouth. Head back. Entertained. Well, he said, still smiling, that's what happens when you rush. My wife froze. Then bent down immediately, reaching for the mess with bare hands. I'm sorry, she said. I'll clean it. I stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough for my chair to scrape the floor. The sound cut through the room, but no one looked at me. Their attention was already back on him, on his joke, on how easily he brushed it off. It's fine, my daughter said quickly. She's tired. She's tired. Like that explained it. Like exhaustion was a flaw instead of a warning. I wanted to tell her to stop. To sit. To let someone else clean it. But my wife shook her head at me, just once, just enough. A silent plea. Don't. Please. So I sat back down. That was the moment something in me shifted. Not snapped. Shifted. Like a blade settling into its handle. Later that night, after the guests left and the house quieted again, I found her in the kitchen. She was scrubbing the floor where the spill had been, even though it was already clean. You don't have to do that, I said. She didn't look up. It makes things easier. For who? She stopped scrubbing. Her shoulders sagged. I don't want him angry, she said softly. Your daughter has enough stress. I leaned against the counter, suddenly tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. I had worked my whole life to give my family stability. And here I was, watching the woman I loved make herself smaller so other people could stay comfortable. I looked around that kitchen, at the appliances she didn't choose, the rules she didn't set, the house she didn't own. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't about disrespect alone. It was about power. And power, when left unchallenged, always asks for more. I went to bed that night without saying another word. But I didn't sleep. I planned. I used to believe silence was a form of protection. I was wrong. For weeks, I said nothing. Not because I didn't see what was happening, but because I wanted to understand it fully. Men rush into confrontation when pride is wounded. Men survive longer when they study the terrain first. At 60, you learn the difference. I started paying attention to rhythms. Who spoke when? Who apologized first? Who adjusted? My wife moved around that house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, while my son-in-law expanded into every room like it belonged to him twice over. Even when he wasn't home, his presence lingered, rules humming in the air. I watched my daughter, too. She wasn't cruel. That almost made it worse. She corrected her mother gently, in private. She smoothed over her husband's sharp edges with excuses. He's under pressure. That's just how he talks. She called it compromise. I called it surrender. One afternoon, while my wife folded laundry on the bed, I asked her when the last time she rested was. She thought about it. Too long. I'm fine, she said automatically. That word, fine, has buried more women than illness ever did. That night, I followed my son-in-law into the garage under the excuse of looking for a tool. It was clean. Organized. Boxes labeled, stacked with purpose. His world ran on control and numbers. I noticed files in a cabinet. Bank statements. Property papers. He didn't bother hiding them. Why would he? Men like him don't imagine threats coming from quiet old fathers. I didn't touch anything. I didn't need to. I just looked. And I remembered. I remembered every contract I'd signed in my life. Every clause people skipped over because it looked boring. Every handshake that meant more than words. I remembered the favor economy that never really goes away, you just stop seeing it when you think you're above it. That evening, my wife mentioned something casually over dinner. The renovation looks beautiful, she said. I didn't realize my old savings helped so much. The room went still. My son-in-law recovered fast. Oh, that? Just temporary. Everything's shared in a family, right? My daughter nodded too quickly. I kept eating. Kept chewing slowly. Let the silence stretch. That was the first time I knew for sure. They had taken from my wife without asking. Not loudly. Not illegally, yet. But intentionally. When you let someone work for free long enough, they stop seeing you as family. They see you as infrastructure. I went back to the guest room and opened my old briefcase. The one I hadn't touched since retirement. Inside were documents most people forget exist once life gets comfortable. I ran my fingers over the edges. Silence had given me clarity. And clarity, I was learning, is far more dangerous than anger. He thought I was retired. What I really was patient. The briefcase smelled like old paper and time. Ink faded but still legible. Receipts. Agreements. Copies of things people assume no one keeps once the money's spent and the years move on. I sat on the edge of the bed, reading slowly, letting memory catch up to paper. My son-in-law ran his life like a spreadsheet. Everything accounted for, except history. Men like him believe the world starts when they take control. They don't imagine foundations older than their confidence. The renovation loan stood out first. I remembered that signature. Not his. My wife's. Years ago, when she'd received a small inheritance from her mother. Money she'd never spent on herself. Money she'd quietly tucked away, for the family. She'd trusted that word too much. I followed the trail. Not online. Not loudly. Just names and dates. A guarantor here. A referral there. A business license that had moved faster than it should have. I knew those people. Not because I was powerful, but because I'd been reliable. 35 years of doing what I said I would. Of not talking much, but delivering every time. Respect accumulates interest if you let it. The next morning, I made a call. Not a threat. Not a demand. Just a question. Out of curiosity, I said, calm as ever, is that agreement still active? There was a pause on the other end. Then a sigh. The kind that means someone just remembered something important. It is, the voice said. Why? No reason, I replied. Just checking. I hung up and went back inside. At breakfast, my son-in-law complained about cash flow. About how business had slowed. About people not returning calls. He said it with irritation, not fear, yet. My daughter nodded sympathetically. My wife poured coffee, careful not to spill. I watched him closely. His jaw tightened between sentences. His fingers tapped the table when he thought no one noticed. Power doesn't vanish all at once. It thins. That afternoon, he asked me, casually, about my old work. You still talk to anyone from back then, he said, like it didn't matter. I shrugged. Some. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That night, my wife asked if everything was all right. She sensed the shift before she understood it. She always did. Yes, I said. And for the first time, it was the truth. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I was informed. And once a man like him realizes the ground beneath him isn't solid, he starts making mistakes. She didn't defend her mother. And that hurt more than anything her husband had done. I waited until the house was quiet. Until the grandchildren were asleep. Until my wife had gone to lie down, exhaustion weighing on her like something she couldn't put down even in rest. My daughter stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a cup that was already clean. I could tell she was bracing herself. She'd learned that habit somewhere along the way. Sit, I said. She hesitated, then obeyed. That alone told me too much. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I asked one question. Do you think this is right? Her mouth opened. Closed. She rubbed her palms together the way she used to when she was little and afraid to tell the truth. It's complicated, she said. That's the word people use when they're choosing comfort over conscience. She told me about the pressure. The bills. The lifestyle they'd built that required everything to keep running smoothly. She told me how her husband hated feeling challenged in his own house. How arguments always ended worse when she picked sides. And your mother? I asked. Where does she fit in that equation? My daughter's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She's strong, she said. She understands. No. She endures. There's a difference. She believes this is the price of being allowed near her grandchildren, my daughter added quietly. She told me that. That sentence landed heavier than any insult I'd heard so far. I felt something in my chest crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but clean. A final break between who I'd been and who I needed to be next. I stood up. This ends, I said. My daughter looked up at me, fear flashing across her face, not of me, but of what my resolve might cost her. You don't understand, she whispered. If he loses control. Then he learns, I said. Or he doesn't. Either way, your mother will not be traded for stability. She reached for my arm. Please. Just, don't make it worse. I looked down at her hand. Then gently removed it. I already let it go too far, I said. That was my mistake. I won't repeat it. That night, I sat beside my wife on the bed. She was half asleep, eyes heavy. You don't have to do this, she murmured. We can manage. I took her hand. It was rougher than it used to be. No, I said softly. I can. She looked at me then. Really looked. And for the first time in weeks, I saw relief instead of worry. The next morning, my son-in-law's phone rang twice before breakfast. Both calls went unanswered. And I knew the balance had begun to shift. He mistook my age for weakness. That was his final miscalculation. The changes started small enough that he tried to explain them away. A delayed payment. A meeting, postponed indefinitely. A supplier suddenly needing things reapproved. He complained about it loudly, pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear like volume could bend reality back into place. I sat at the table reading the newspaper. Men like him can't stand when the world doesn't respond on command. They're used to frictionless authority, orders followed, expectations met. When resistance appears without a face, it unsettles them. They don't know who to fight. By the third day, his tone changed. Less arrogance. More edge. At dinner, he snapped at my wife for using the wrong oil. Corrected her in front of everyone. I watched her shoulders tense out of habit, and then, something new. She didn't apologize. She just nodded and kept eating. That moment mattered more than he realized. He tried to regain ground with me next. Asked about my health. My retirement. Offered advice I didn't ask for. He circled like a man looking for leverage and finding none. You ever think about investing? He asked, casual. No, I said. I think about exits. He laughed, unsure if it was a joke. That afternoon, he finally confronted me, not directly, but close enough. Some people are getting cold, he said. Old contacts. I don't get it. I folded the paper and looked at him. Calm. Curious. Markets change, I said. So do loyalties. His jaw tightened. That night, I made sure everything was ready. Documents copied. Conversations logged. One final call placed, not to threaten, not to brag, but to confirm timing. The notice sat on my desk in a plain envelope. No return address. No emotion attached. I waited. Power doesn't collapse when you push it. It collapses when it realizes it's alone. The next morning, he woke up already angry. He blamed the economy. The government. Anyone but himself. When he left the house, he slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frames. My wife flinched, then stopped herself. Progress isn't loud. Sometimes it's just the absence of fear. I picked up the envelope. Today, I decided, was the day he learned something important. About age. About patience. About the man he never bothered to study. I placed the envelope on the counter where he couldn't miss it. And waited for him to come home. The house was never as safe as he thought. He came home late, footsteps heavy, keys thrown louder than necessary. Anger clung to him like sweat. He stopped when he saw the envelope on the counter. Plain. Unmarked. Patient. What's this? He asked. Yours, I said from the table. I didn't look up. He opened it standing there, confidence still trying to hold its shape. Then his eyes moved. Left to right. Slower. His breathing changed before his face did. What is this? He repeated, sharper now. Read it again, I said. Take your time. The clause wasn't dramatic. No bold print. No warnings. Just language. Clean. Legal. Boring enough that most people skip it. It tied the renovation funding, my wife's inheritance, to conditional occupancy and liability. It connected debt responsibility back to contribution. It made assumptions he'd never questioned suddenly very expensive. He looked at my wife. Did you know about this? She shook her head. I trusted you. That hurt him more than the document. You can't just, he started, then stopped. Because he knew. He'd built his world on half-read agreements and full confidence. He'd mistaken access for ownership. I finally looked at him. You turned my wife into labor, I said calmly. You thought that was invisible. It wasn't. My daughter stood frozen in the doorway, fear and relief fighting on her face. "This doesn't mean anything," he said, voice rising. "I'll handle it." "You already did," I replied. "Just not the way you planned." He left the house that night. Not to cool off. To make calls. To fix things. When he came back hours later, his shoulders were lower. His voice quieter. The world had stopped answering him. The next day, the tone in the house changed completely. He spoke carefully. Asked instead of ordered. Offered help like it was new language. Too late. My wife didn't rush anymore. Didn't hover. Didn't apologize. That evening, she sat beside me on the couch without looking for permission. "I don't want to stay," she said softly. I nodded. "We won't." Revenge didn't look like yelling. It looked like clarity. He lost sleep. Lost ground. Lost the version of himself that believed age meant irrelevance. And I realized something important as I watched him unravel quietly. This wasn't about winning. It was about restoring balance. And balance was finally tipping where it belonged. He didn't shout at first. That surprised me. Men who are used to control usually explode when it slips. He didn't. He tightened instead. Became careful. Polite. The kind of politeness that arrives when someone realizes the room no longer belongs to them. His business calls became shorter. Quieter. He stopped pacing. Stopped complaining out loud. Silence replaced arrogance, and everyone felt it. My daughter finally found her voice, not all at once, but in pieces. She corrected him when he snapped. Asked him not to speak to her mother that way. The words shook when she said them, but she said them anyway. Fear doesn't disappear. It just learns to stand up. One evening, he asked me to talk. Just us. We sat across from each other at the table where my wife had eaten standing up for weeks. He looked tired. Smaller. "You didn't have to do this," he said. I met his eyes. I didn't have to let it go as long as I did. He swallowed. I was under pressure. So was she, I replied. Every day. He didn't argue that. The house felt different now. Not warmer. Clearer. My wife moved at her own pace. Laughed once, short, surprised, like she hadn't expected the sound to come out of her. I caught it and held onto it like proof. That night, she told me she wanted to leave. Not in anger. Not in fear. "I want to choose," she said. We packed quietly. 1 bag each. Essentials only. 60 years teaches you how little you actually need when dignity is intact. In the morning, he stood by the door. Didn't stop us. Couldn't. My daughter hugged her mother longer than usual. Whispered apologies that came too late, but still mattered. As we stepped outside, my son-in-law spoke once more. I never meant to. I raised my hand. Not in anger. In closure. You don't get to explain harm after benefiting from it, I said. You just live with what's left. We walked away. Behind us, systems unraveled. Quietly. The kind of collapse that doesn't make headlines but changes everything. I didn't look back. Power doesn't scream when it leaves. It just stops answering. We didn't leave angry. We left whole. The drive was quiet. Not uncomfortable, settled. The kind of silence that arrives after something heavy has been set down. My wife looked out the window, watching the city pass like she was seeing it for the first time in months. Her shoulders were relaxed. Her hands rested in her lap instead of gripping a task that didn't exist anymore. Halfway through the drive, she reached for my hand. "Thank you," she said. Not for the house. Not for the money. For choosing her. That's what men forget sometimes. what strength is actually for. We moved into a small place near the water. Nothing impressive. Nothing borrowed. Mornings came without alarms. Without instructions. She cooked when she wanted. Rested when she didn't. She laughed more easily. Slept deeper. The lines in her face softened, not because time reversed, but because weight lifted. I heard later that my son-in-law's business never quite recovered. Not destroyed. Just, smaller. Slower. People hesitated. Doors that once opened automatically now required knocking. That's what happens when power learns it was temporary. My daughter visits. Alone sometimes. With the kids. We don't talk about the past unless she brings it up. When she does, I listen. Healing isn't loud either. One afternoon, my wife stood in our kitchen, and washed a cup slowly, peacefully. No urgency. No fear of doing it wrong. She looked at me and smiled. That smile was my victory. Not because I won. Because she no longer had to lose. I don't hate my son-in-law. Hate keeps you tied to people longer than necessary. I removed his leverage. That was enough. Consequences teach better than anger ever could. Men ask me sometimes how I stayed so calm. The truth is simple. When you've loved someone for 60 years, you don't need rage to defend them. You need patience. You need memory. You need to remember who you are, and what you owe the woman who stood beside you when no one else was watching. They thought I'd stay broken. They didn't know what patience can do to a man like me.